My name is Emily Milanowski, and this is my Picha Kucha presentation about using digital portfolios as evidence of student learning and growth in visual arts classrooms. This is my sixth year as an art teacher at Lee Middle and High School. And when I was growing up, I knew exactly what I wanted to be, and that was a teacher. I initially started out in elementary education. However, after a few years, I realized I wasn't really passionate about what I was doing and needed to make a switch. I really knew that I loved art, but I didn't think that I had the talent to do it as I had never taken any high school classes for art. But I was always extremely interested in it and I was really creative. I ended up graduating from Western, double majoring in art education and English education for secondary students. When I got my first job, I was teaching primarily middle school art classes, and my thoughts about what a portfolio should look like were similar to this. They were folders, storage vessels truly for student work when they were in the process of working on it, and more often than not, they ended up being the storage place for projects when they were finished. Students were expected to take projects home, but I began to find out that they eventually were ending up in these paper portfolios, and at the end of the trimester, I usually found these paper portfolios outside in the trash can, which was quite disappointing to me. At the beginning of my third year of teaching, I found out that our middle school art program was going to be cut due to lack of English teachers. I was asked to move up to high school English, therefore decreasing the amount of middle school art classes we were going to have. Although I did have the degree to teach English, it was never anything that I had really expected to do. So I started to move into this transition of going back and forth from meeting with high school English department while trying to stay current with the middle school teachers to figure out what they were doing in their classrooms to make it relevant to what I was doing with middle school students in my art room. After a few trimesters, I really started to get overwhelmed with what I was doing and felt like I just didn't fit in anywhere at school. I was on a middle school and high school schedule and didn't really have the same prep hours as middle school or high school teachers. And I always just felt I was kind of lost in the shuffle. During professional development, I just really felt like I was all by myself. No one really had a good place for me. I started to plan more and more with the high school English department as that was a core class and lots of emphasis was being placed on students um, achieving success in core classes and not much focus was given to the non-core classes and developing student growth in those classes. When assessments were brought up in our professional development, and we were told that assessments needed to be done across the board. I was so wrapped up in making sure my English students were proficient that working with my middle school art classes really kind of fell to the wayside. So, in order to get an assessment into my middle school art classes, my assessments began to look something like this: basic paper test, checking to see knowledge, very lower level thinking questions for students. They weren't really giving me much feedback, but I was getting an assessment in. Students began to look like this when they were taking tests. They were uninterested. They didn't care what was a result of their test. And even though they were showing me amazing results through projects, they just couldn't tell me on test what they had learned. I started to feel like I was reteaching the same things over and over and over, and it was extremely frustrating. I wasn't very interested in creating new assessments for my classroom. I was more focused on trying to create student interest through projects. And even though I knew I needed to create assessments to show student learning and growth, it wasn't something that I really actually cared much about doing. At the beginning of this current year, I found out that I was not going to be teaching high school English classes anymore, but I was going to be teaching high school art classes. Although I was really excited to be done teaching English, I was really nervous to start teaching high school art classes. I didn't feel as confident teaching one specific medium and really thought that this was going to show through to the kids and my classes were not going to be extremely successful. So at the beginning of this year, I really tried to think of something fresh and new and an area that I felt more confident in that I could bring in and teach to the students along with teaching a medium for art. My idea was to start students out with portfolios. I didn't want to do traditional portfolios as when I had tried to do portfolios in the past, they ended up in the trash can. I wanted something that wasn't going to take up space in my classroom and also utilize the one-to-one technology that we have implemented in our district. Every classroom has a cart of MacBooks, and I didn't want them to just sit there. I wanted students to really use this technology to benefit them, not just something that was for school, but that they could take with them outside of the classroom. So I decided to come up with a digital portfolio. Students for my classes started a digital portfolio using the platform Weebly, and for every class they took with me, we listed their projects underneath the class, and this became their final trimester exam, a showcase of all their work. Students really began to get into using these portfolios. It did take a lot of troubleshooting in the beginning and almost convincing students why these were valuable to them both in and out of the classroom. But once we moved past that point, students really began to take ownership in using these portfolios. They were much more engaged in finishing their projects because they knew this work had to go onto their portfolios because it was going to be used as their final exam for the trimester. One of the biggest takeaways I have from this term and taking the class on creating assessments was realizing the importance of incorporating student reflection in the assessment process. This really gave me an idea of what students were learning and where my instruction could have been better or needs to be better in the future. One of my favorite parts of using digital portfolios in my classroom was when I realized students were truly taking ownership over these portfolios. Specifically this trimester, I realized I had more and more students adding their own personal tabs to these digital portfolios to showcase work that they were doing outside of the classroom. This specific portfolio has a amateur photography tab that this particular student wanted to showcase her work that she's doing outside of the classroom. This addition to the digital portfolios has really actually given me an insight about what students are interested in outside of my classroom. Even though I've asked students in surveys before, I don't really feel like they give me a clear idea of projects they are interested in, possibly because they're not sure. If they see something, they can show it to me, but they can't necessarily tell me. So this personalization has really helped me kind of move forward and create projects that are a little bit more geared to student interest. One thing I really wanted to know about at the end of this year was if students understood what the purpose of a portfolio is. After I had decided to run with this project this entire year, and based on the information I've gained from this assessment course, I really wanted to see what students' opinions were. So I gave them a survey and their answers came back as anonymous to see what they felt like the purpose of a portfolio is and if they felt it was beneficial to them. So some of the feedback I had from students was that portfolios were beneficial, that they were able to showcase the work that they were doing in the classroom, and they could look for areas that were needed to be improved, and that they were really proud to showcase their work. Another important thing that students told me were that a portfolio allowed them to be organized and that they would never lose their artwork because it was photographed. I've had numerous students in the past try to apply to art schools their senior year and realized that they had never saved any of their artwork from middle school or high school. And they really didn't have a good body of work to be able to put together in a portfolio. So this has been a great way for students to hold on to that. Something else I asked students was if they'd rather take a test or create a portfolio. And while I pretty much thought I knew the answer to this, I was surprised that a few students did say test, primarily because they were better at test taking and they didn't feel as strong with creating a portfolio. Third question I asked students were if they thought a test and portfolio showed the same levels of learning, and almost all of my students said that they did not think that they showed the same level of learning. And I was really impressed that most of students could actually tell me that testing was just showing what you know, but an actual portfolio was showing what you could do. The final question I asked students was if they felt like your portfolio was useful and if it helped them learn. They helped them learn any new skills, ideas, or if this year this was just a total waste of class time for them. And I asked them to give me some reasoning to explain their answer. Almost all of my students agreed that they thought the portfolios were useful and did help them learn new skills. However, my favorite answer to this question is the answer that's listed at the bottom in pink, where the student responded, I think it doesn't really do anything, and it is just like turning in the project by itself, except every project is combined together. The only skill that is learned from this is photography, editing, and how to create a website, but it is not teaching anything new that includes art into it. This answer really amused me because the student clearly didn't make the connection of photography, photography editing, and the creation of a website are all forms of creating art. So really having this student reflection component showed me the areas that I probably need to do better at explaining how these portfolios are fitting into the art classroom, not just with the specific medium such as drawing or painting or crafts that the class is based on. One of the best research materials I found from doing the research paper was a table in a study done by Helen Barrett that dealt with researching electronic portfolios and learner engagement. I really enjoyed the comparison of the portfolio differences in this table, comparing assessment of learning and supporting assessment for learning. I realized that my portfolios that I carried out this year were really an assessment of student learning. In the future, I really want to try to move towards the items listed in the right column, which are assessment for learning. I want students to really be able to reflect more on their artwork and make those connections rather than just me mandating what their portfolio needs to contain. Looking forward, I really hope to expand the use of digital portfolios in my classroom and hope that if you are using portfolios currently in your classroom, that you consider using these digital portfolios to create a broader body of evidence for student learning and growth. Hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you.